Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode. So a couple weeks ago, we did a episode called Josh's Journey. Thank you all if you listened to that, where it just shared a little bit of my life and kind of how I got to where I am. And I have gotten frequent comments from people of, when are you doing Kimb's journey? We want we want to know this part.
You
And
have?
so, yeah, especially from my wife and my parents who all
Oh,
listen to this.
and
Like,
I love them all.
yeah, they were like, every time I see them, my mom's like, when are you going to do Kimb's journey? And so here we are. Welcome to today. Welcome to Kimb's journey. How are you feeling about this, Kim?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Initial response is like, talking about myself the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you kind of, the day we were going to record Josh's journey, we sort of just hopped on. Kim's like, I have an idea. Let's record. I don't want to share it before we record. And then just sprung it on me.
I
And
did.
at least today, I warned Kim that I wanted to do this an hour and 10 minutes ago.
You did. You did. And I knew it was probably coming, although I was happy just leaving it.
It's true.
If you've noticed, I haven't mentioned it.
Well, here we are. So why don't I know you've shared little bits and pieces, but let's just get like a timeline and then we can go into more specific things. So how would you say your journey began?
Well, I was born in 1983. And I will tell you, my parents they split up when I was about 1 and moved, like my mom moved to a different town. We were living with her, so my dad on weekends. So mostly grew up with my mom, although my dad was very much a steady figure in my life. But growing up with my mom, I was in a small town in Kansas. And she was not someone who actively practiced any kind of faith, or at least not that I knew of. And my first exposure to the church, I remember being like 3 years old, probably right at 3. And my sister, who was 6 or 7, wanted to go to church. Well, my mom and my stepdad did not want to. And so these little Allen girls walked themselves to church on Sunday mornings, like 7-year-old and 3-year-old. Here we go. I remember sitting in a pew and like giving a quarter in the offering tray because that's all I had. I don't know what the heck we were doing. You know what I mean? And I just remember faith was like something that came so easily to my sister. And so I would just go along with her to these things. Fast forward, we didn't go there all the time, but sometimes went to youth group or whatever. I learned really critical things, like it was Lot's wife who's turned into a pillar of salt.
Really critical things.
Yes. Actually, they made it really fun. They had what they called Wednesday Night Live, and it was this big like game show. So you had a sheet to study, and it was all Bible stories. You study through the week, and then it's like this big game show, and like Truth or Dare, not Truth or Dare, Double Dare. Do you remember that show on Nickelodeon?
No.
Okay, well, you have to answer these questions, and then there's a physical challenge.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
that sounds fun.
it was fun. I would totally do it again. As an adult, look, I do know how to have fun.
I believe
Okay.
you.
Anyway, so kind of in and out of youth group every now and then. But when I was probably 14, I went to an event called Acquire the Fire. Because my sister asked me to go, And I went and was wrecked and gave my life to the Lord and was super on fire as much as I could be, being 13 or 14 years old. And to be quite honest, I had a lot of pushback at home and it wasn't easy. And there's something in me that is somewhat rebellious. And so because I had pushback, it made me want to be a Christian even more.
Mm.
Um, and so that was kind of a struggle. And all along that time, like growing up between starting to go to church at 3, which again wasn't a regular thing, through probably, I don't know, well, through teenage years, there was also this element of kind of spiritual attack that was happening in my house. And I found out later from my sister that she had experienced this stuff too, but she didn't ever want to tell me and scare me. Well, I was just dealing with all of this by myself because I was like, I must be crazy, but this stuff is happening.
I mean, isn't that like how that side likes to operate, is to make you feel alone?
I think so. Yes. And that was really tough and really intense, but it also really solidified what side I was on,
Mm.
you know? And I remember having my first encounter with angels around that time. Um, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm just going to tell you about it because it really happened. There was one day when kind of the attacks were pretty intense, like doors opening and closing and like just stuff kind of, it felt like after me. Maybe it wasn't after me, but it felt like it was. And I remember just going and breaking down on the floor of my bathroom and just like crying out to God. And then all of a sudden I open my eyes and there are these 2 angels standing there next to me. And they're like, no, we're with you. Like, you're okay. You're safe. Um, which at that time, I couldn't tell anybody. That was freaking crazy. Like, I can't tell anybody that I just saw angels.
Yeah.
But it was the comfort I needed when I needed it. So then we wound up moving away from that small town when I was 16 and away from any connection I had to the church. And so I kind of fell away from it because I didn't have anyone in this new town. I didn't have a church to go to. I didn't have a community where I knew anyone. And as an introvert, naturally, it was not a comfortable thing for me to go and try to integrate into a new group. So I didn't. Um, so kind of fast forward into college, I was pretty far away. I never renounced the faith, but I just kind of was out of practice,
Mm.
and I wasn't interested in any kind of church. I wasn't interested in reading a Bible. I wasn't interested in praying. I wasn't interested in any of that stuff that Christians were supposed to do. Um, but there were some moments, especially in college, where it was clear that the Lord had his hand on me. And honestly, I can't chalk it up to anything but him. I'll give you a really fun example. This is not a fun example, but I'll give you a very real example. So I went to college in Hawaii. I was kind of running from living in Kansas. I just didn't want to be here anymore. But I went to college in Hawaii. I didn't know anybody out there, but quickly like found a group of friends who wound up being like my core people. And there was one weekend we went, there's like this swimming hole out in the middle of the jungle, and it's fairly well known. And we hiked out there, and they have this rope swing that you're like up on the cliffs, and you get the rope and you swing down, and then you land in um you land in a swimming hole, like freshwater pool. So there's a swimming hole with this rope swing. And if you know about Hawaii and how the islands were formed, it's volcanoes that erupted and then the lava turned into rock and then it turned into like this lush island, right? So these rocks around it are lava rocks that were kind of swinging off the swing and into the pool. And when it was my turn, I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Like not feeling confident about it at all. But all my friends are there and they're doing it and everyone else has been fine. And so I go to do it and I go to swing. And like as soon as I leave the ground, my hands start slipping down the rope. I don't have a foot grip on it. And I get just enough momentum to like send me flying, but it's like my feet hit the lava rock, like the cliffs around where what I was supposed to be avoiding. And I tumbled probably 6 or 7 times head over foot on these lava rocks until I landed in the water. And the only thing that stopped my momentum was my head hitting a rock underwater. And I remember in that moment thinking, oh, I'm dead. This is how people get killed, right?
Yeah.
But I was fine. And I stood up and I'm like, I'm okay. And I will tell you, the next week or so, I had a lot of time to really ponder what happened because I was bruised from head to toe. Like the soles of my feet were bruised. Like it was really pretty bad, but I had no broken bones and I had no concussion and I was like completely fine. And that was like this very clear thing, like, there's something happening because that should have turned out differently.
Yeah.
And so there were just a few things like that that kind of happened, even in that time when I was away. I was turned the other way, I suppose. I don't think God ever actually left me. Um, but maybe in my mid-20s or so, I came back to the church. I got baptized. But it wasn't until 2012, I was going through a divorce and stuff was just crappy, like all around crappy in my life. And I kind of reached the end of what I felt like I could do. And so I just had a very real moment with the Lord. And it was on December 31st of like 2011. And I'm like, okay, all right, God, I've been doing it my way. I'll do it your way. I'll give you a year. I think I've talked about this before. I'll give you a year. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I will dive into the scripture. I will, whatever, it doesn't matter, but I'm with you for a year. And if that doesn't work, then I'll probably go back. But so I gave him a year and I really did dive in head first. Like I gave everything I had, And so I started reading and then the scripture started opening up. It was like this, uh, at the risk of sounding really cheesy, it was like this blossoming flower, like things I never knew were there were there. And I'm reading things that on the page it says one thing, but it's hitting me in a different way. And I'm getting revelation about this. And so I go back and I'm mulling over this with the Lord. All the while I'm in like I'm in a very traditional, like traditionally attractional church. And also finding that what I'm developing on my own does not look like what is being displayed to me in the church. So kind of feeling, I felt like I needed to be there, but also feeling kind of like a weirdo in that, you know what I mean? So I also developed some real insecurities about praying out loud. And because the conversations I have with the Lord didn't sound like the conversations that people were having during public prayer time. And I'm like, I'm going to be outed. People are going to think I'm not a real Christian. Like this is going to be terrible. And they're going to be like, who is she? Why would she say those things? Why does she talk to him so like casually? And I was just so afraid of this judgment, you know? Um, while I'm still having this very flourishing relationship with the Lord on my own, I would say in my prayer closet, but it was everywhere. I worked out of town, like 35 miles away. And so I couldn't like go home for lunch, but I also didn't want to stay in my office because people would still bug me and I really wanted to break. So I would wind up going and sitting in my car and I would read a little and I would nap a little, but mostly I was out there like just connecting with the Lord. And I don't know, at that time, I didn't know how to say it except that I'm just sitting with him and listening. And I think I've talked about this before. I had this practice of getting to a place where I could hear him and like maybe not audibly hear him, but learning to hear from him. And it was super simple in just reciting this one scripture, like be still and know that I'm God. And I would inhale on be still and I would exhale on and know. I would inhale on that and I would exhale on am God. And I'm not doing this out loud, but within myself, I'm like repeating this until I'm like face to face with him. Um, and so that year just like kind of changed the trajectory of everything because it went from faceless, knowing of this faceless, judging, condemning, law-making God to knowing this loving creator who wants nothing more than to be with me, like knowing that God. And it was just a game changer. Um, and then he told me one day, uh, in my prayer, like I had gotten to a point, and I told you I was going through a divorce. I had gotten to this point where I was in prayer time with him, and I was like, I don't need anything but you. I don't want to date again. I don't want to get married again. I don't need a relationship with somebody else. Like, this is enough. This is all I need. This is all I want. And not even a second later, he told me, oh, you're going to marry Jason, who happens to be your pastor and one of your best friends. And I was like, oh, God, I don't think you heard me.
I think that's the other voice.
And then for 2 years, he continued to show me that this is what he wanted. And that was a real struggle because it felt like something bigger than what I could make happen. It was outside of what I thought that my will was. And it was hard because, like I said, he was one of my best friends. And so I got to see him date girls and he would talk to me about his girl problems. And I'd be like, are you kidding me, God? But through it all, I mean, he also told me to wait because he had to come to that. And there came a point where he came to that. And I actually had to, it was like 2 years later. And I was at home by myself again on New Year's Eve. This seems to be a tradition with me and God, I guess. I was just like laying on my couch and had worship music on and was just kind of soaking with him. And he was like, oh no, you've got to tell Jason now. I was like, you said he would come to me. And he's like, plans have changed. You've got to talk to him. We've got to talk to him now. So I did what any rational person would do. I walked around my house and cried for 2 hours, like resisting. But finally I reached out to him and it was the most awkward conversation. But I was at a point with the Lord where I couldn't not do what he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And it was actually one of the ways that I learned how to hear when he was telling me to do things, because he would tell me to do things that weren't things that I'm coming up with. And anyway, so Jason and I are married now, like almost 10 years, but it was an interesting, like real faith building process there. And Jason doesn't love when I tell this story because he thinks this means that I didn't want to marry him. But what it means is that it was all God, and like the romantic feelings didn't even come until Jason sought the Lord and was like, oh, yeah, we are supposed to get married. And then all of a sudden, this floodgate opened, and then we were like in love, and it was great, except that he was like my best friend. And it was like, how could that be better? You know? Anyway, so this is what happened. And then shortly after we got married, oddly, the next day after our wedding, we closed the doors of the church that he was pastoring and I was on staff with. And a few months later, we started a different ministry because the Lord was telling us to do it. We struggled a lot because I was someone who, through that relationship that I built with the Lord, I mean, I couldn't help but have an ear turned to him. And I mean, that's just what I did. Like all I knew was to hear from him. But that was how I was brought up in the faith. But unfortunately, it was just by myself because I didn't have that church background like a lot of people have. And it did cause some strife in our marriage because he grew up in a certain denomination and he had certain beliefs and he was going through his own journey and having to unpack and unwind and like rebuild and figure out what he actually believed too. And I just have to say that even though God was in this from the beginning, this marriage, it didn't mean that it was easy, and that we didn't struggle even with faith stuff. And it just happened. But I mean, we've gotten through a lot of it. Anyway, so a couple years later, I was introduced. Somebody I knew was like, you need to know this woman in town. She is prophetic. And I think you just really need to know her. And so we set up a meeting with her at a coffee shop. We meet her, and it's not even like introductions. It's like, you need to listen to this person on YouTube. And it happened to be Ian Clayton, which is funny because this is how you started too, Josh. It was with Ian. And we're like, okay. And she's like, oh, it's the courts of heaven. And we're like, I don't know what that is, but we'll do it. This is my sister and I. And so then we like just do a search on YouTube and find Ian Clayton Courts of Heaven and listen to or watch or listen to this video. And then I proceeded to listen to it probably 8 or 10 more times because it was heavy stuff, man. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. And I did not catch it all. And then I listened again and I did not catch it all. And it was a lot. But there was something in it for me because honestly, I think what it did was it opened up and put words to some of how I was already having a relationship with the Lord, but I didn't know it was normal or okay. You know what I mean? Like it felt a little justifying. And it also gave some like very practical steps to advance that. And so I have to give him credit for really leveling up, like opening the door for me to level up my relationship and my faith in how I operate with the Lord. And it's funny, it was Ian Clayton, and then I went to a conference with Mike Parsons, who's been a guest on the show, which was really cool because he was like early influencer in my mystic life, I suppose. And then it was Robert Henderson, who I never hear anything about anymore. But he taught on the courts of heavens too. But very shortly into engaging heaven or whatever, I was told to stop listening to anybody, like stop listening to other teachers. And the Lord was drawing me back to him. And he said, let me be your teacher and let me show you what you need to know. Let me tell you who you are. Let me show you what your calling and purpose are and all of these things. And so that's kind of where it all started for this mystic stuff. And it's wild. I mean, it I know who I am more than ever before. And I like to say that I spent 30 years like deciding who I was and like setting up this is Kimb. And then I had to spend the next 10 years like undoing that and letting the Lord actually define it. But it's so much more full when that happens. You know what I mean? And there are things that he had to strip away. And there's been a huge unwinding. We talk about going up the mountain and having to like take things off to get to him, to get to that place of oneness. And then he sends you back down. And sometimes you can pick it back up and sometimes you can't. And it has been a million times up that mountain and a million times down that mountain. And I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to have to go through an unwinding process. It's very uncomfortable and it feels like everything's being taken from you while you're still receiving everything. And it's like what a paradigm to be in, you know? But there are things that even like identities that even that I learned in the church that had to be stripped away. And those were some of the hardest ones. Um, I was having a conversation with Yeshua one day and I was asking him, uh, well, who do you say I am? Like, who am I? And he's like, who do you think I say you are? And I was like, well, I know a few things. Like, I know I'm a prophet. And he laughed at me and he said, no, you're not a prophet. And I said, yes. And he said, you're prophetic. You hear from me, but that doesn't make you a prophet. You are XYZ. Like, and I was like, what? And so then I had to go through this whole like unwinding of that. And it was even a direct word from the Lord. But it was something that in the church, like, this is what I had learned. This is what you are. If you operate this way, you are this. And there was so much of that stuff. But I think this is why I'm so passionate about identity. This is why I'm so passionate about uh, value and purpose and drawing that out of people. Josh, I think you and I have a lot of this in common, um, but it's because I know that what he has and what he's put in each individual is so valuable and so needed. And maybe there are lucky people who've never had that quashed. Like people haven't tried to push it down, and the world hasn't contradicted it. But I know a lot of people, those things have been contradicted and they have been told that's crazy or that's not possible or who do you think you are or those kinds of things. And so I guess I just have such a desire to put power behind those things. Like I want to help affirm those things that the Lord has put in you. And I want you to like flourish in them. And I want the world to see that part of the Father that resides in you. You know, that was a long story.
No, I think it's great. It's just fun to hear like how even from early, like the mystical or the spirit realm, like there was more to life than the natural or just church from a very early age, even if you didn't know what to do with it or what it was. And I can't help but think that had to be really influential in like when some of the other like language for it started to come, then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, like I can put this in line now because I know what it is. And um yeah, I think everybody's journey is so special and important because it's their journey. Like it's you can't compare my journey to Kim's journey because it's just ours,
Yeah.
and you can't compare our journey to your journey. Like, what Kim has shared today is not what your life is going to look like, even if there's similarities. And um, I think it's like, it's an invitation of like this is what God was able to do with me, and your life is similar. And I think it's amazing to hear people's testimonies, to hear how they got to where they are today, like the good, the bad, the amazing, the tumbling down a mountain. We both have like a really great tumbling down a mountain story where we probably should have died. Um, but yeah, yours was maybe in a more scenic place. Mine was like in Wyoming or something. Yours was in Hawaii.
I've heard
Sounds
Wyoming
better.
is beautiful.
It was beautiful, but I really love the ocean, so I think Hawaii would be better. But
Yeah. Well,
thank you for sharing though. Like I hope that people get something out of it, and um that it unlocks possibilities for them
yeah.
in the life you've lived.
Yeah. Me too. I do also want to say though that uh I don't think the mystic journey is always easy. Um, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I started stepping into this and then everything was perfect. It's not. And I still struggle with a lot of things, like there's some hugely amazing things that I've learned along the way and I've experienced. Like one of my favorite things to do with the Father that He allows me to do is like to step back into Him and see through His eyes, like see people through His eyes. And it is the most overwhelmingly full of love. And oh my gosh, it's amazing. But I also struggle sometimes to like see myself and what's happening to me. And I don't think I've like arrived, and I don't think there's like a point of arrival. I think there are, mm, I don't know, mile markers, like something like you get to a point and then you see, oh, there's so much more to do, so much further to go, and I don't know that we'll ever reach the end of what He has to show us or to teach us. But I don't know. Like everyone else, I'm on a journey,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful to have this platform to be able to like work through some of it, you know? And I think we wrestle through a lot of subjects, and some are solid and some are just so like barely that like we have the essence of it,
Mm,
you know?
yeah. I kind of think that like the Christian life is like I think God is a God who invites you on adventures. And so like the thing that popped in my mind was like the Lord of the Rings. And it's like when you first say yes to Christ, it's like the very beginning of that book or movie. And then you go through the hardest things you've ever had to go through after you've said yes. And I think sometimes that's not people's expectation, but it's all part of like working out your identity and working out your purpose. Um, and then the end is like so fulfilling because now you know who you are. And it's just, I think it's such a, like, that to me is like, that's the invitation of Christ is like, let's go on an adventure together. And it's going
Yeah.
to be hard. It's going to be really wild. There's going to be laughter. There's going to be tears, but it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I don't know. I hope that listening to Josh's journey, and I hope that listening to my journey uh at least gives some people some perspective of who we are, but also some solidarity and knowing that maybe you're not the only one who goes through messy journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so.
you know, like it's not always rainbows and unicorns, although sometimes it is those things. But there are other things. There are obstacles. There are roadblocks. There are times when you have to turn around and retrace your steps and start over again. There are times when you're trying to trudge up that mountain and it's hard, but
Definitely.
you're not alone. Like a bunch of us are on this journey too. And maybe you're just on the mountain right next to mine. Or maybe you're a little ahead of me. Or maybe I'm a little ahead of you. I don't know, but we're all doing this together.
I think it's great. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Okay.
All right. Well, guys, we will catch you on the next one.
Bye, guys. Hey, thanks for listening. Keep up with us along this journey by liking, subscribing, and becoming a member through YouTube.
Members get exclusive access to bonus content with our guests, deeper dives into topics, and a look into other projects. We're glad to have you here. See you next time.